of the wounded at the Defense Department, we've had a number of calls, people saying, well, you haven't said how many people were killed or hurt at the Pentagon. We haven't said so because we do not know how many people have been hurt or wounded there. We'll get David Martin to bring us up to date on the best available information about that just as we go past this next hour. Now, it's been our practice all day. When we cross the top of the hour or cross a half-hour mark, we try to bring you up to date. This is part of our rolling and continuing coverage. We are aware that many people are coming home from work, many people coming to the television set for the first time in the day and saying, well, I'm not quite sure what's happened. So at the top of each hour and at the half-hour mark, generally speaking, we try then to bring you up to date on all the information we have. Now, you are watching continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America. Dan Rather, CBS News, back at CBS News World headquarters in New York with the far-flung worldwide resources of CBS News, covering an unprecedented day in American history. The United States has put its forces, armed and otherwise, on alert as governments worldwide held crisis meetings today, given the events that happened primarily in and around the World Trade Centers in New York and the Pentagon. Security has been tightened at embassies, airports, public buildings, and it's fair to say that the country has braced for more possible attacks. That's one reason that air traffic was shut down, a virtual lockdown of air traffic in the United States today. The FAA does not expect that to be any relief on that until at least noon tomorrow. That was the last available information from the FAA. We're also told that the financial markets, stock markets, will be closed tomorrow. I don't know that we've had official triple confirmation of that, but I believe the most reliable information is the markets closed down today, and the most reliable information is that they will be closed tomorrow. That the investigation of who's responsible for these dastardly acts today is already underway, but the first order of business is to tend to the wounded, as President Bush has said on 2 occasions, to offer encouragement, support, and prayers for the families of victims in these bombings. 4 aircraft hijacked, 1 hit a World Trade Center tower, and then another, and then the World Trade Center towers collapsed. Another hijacked plane hit the Pentagon in Washington, and then yet another hijacked commercial aircraft, all of them bound from the East Coast to the West Coast, went down in a fairly remote area about 80 miles from Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania. No one has claimed responsibility for these bombings. This is the scene in Lower Manhattan as the following continues. The 2 towers of the World Trade Center are down, destroyed, completely collapsed in separate avalanches, 1 then 2, of steel and concrete. Now, the World Trade Center complex includes 7 buildings. 2 other buildings in the World Trade Center complex just a short while ago were reported to still be in flames and in danger of collapsing. Some people are said to be alive in the collapsed debris of the World Trade Center, and efforts have been made all day to search through that debris for people still alive in the debris. You may recall in the Oklahoma City bombing that there were people, some of them extremely badly wounded, who were pulled out of the debris literally days after the building, the federal building in Oklahoma City, had been bombed and collapsed. New York City police and firemen been working literally around the clock this day to try to stabilize the situation as best they can in the area, to get people out of the World Trade Center. Many lives were saved when people got out of the World Trade Center. We don't know how many people were killed, but we know that the lives of many people were saved because they acted calmly and got out of the building, extremely quickly. But how many lives were saved and how many were lost, we simply don't know in this unprecedented show of terrorist horror. The World Trade Center towers were 110 stories high. They collapsed in this shower of rubble and debris that you now see. Some people were forced out of the building. Some leapt, forced out at very high floors, and leaped to their death. Several eyewitnesses described one man and woman holding hands as they leaped and plunged to their death. Terrorists directed 2 planes into the towers in the middle of the morning rush hour. That sent thousands of Trade Center workers fleeing for their lives. 50,000 people normally work in the World Trade Center. Thousands more come there as tourists. This is an actual photograph of the second plane, apparently United Flight 175, Boston to Los Angeles, plowing in. This was after an earlier plane had plowed in at a higher level. You see, the first plane went into a fairly high level into that one tower where you see the black smoke. That was the first plane. The second plane came in lower, estimated maybe 80 or 85 floors up. Keep in mind that these towers are 110 stories high. So that second plane went deep into the building. Some said it almost came out the other side, and there was that.
This is Chris Clark in Nashville. Scott Couch is standing by, and Scott, you have we've just seen that second plane go into the to that second tower, and you have some information about that, right?
Chris, with an accident the size of this, an attack, the one that happened in New York, the one in Washington, you knew there would be a Nashville connection. Here's what we know. News Channel 5 has recently learned that a sophomore here at Father Ryan High School has a very close connection to what happened at the World Trade Center this morning. What we have learned is that the sophomore here at school has a stepfather who flew for American Airlines out of Atlanta, and that he was the pilot of one of those planes that was directed into the World Trade Center this morning. What we know at this point, quite frankly, is not as much as we'd like to know. School officials are reluctant to share the student's name with us. Obviously, privacy issues are at work. However, we have asked through the principal here at Father Ryan if he would contact the family to see if they would be comfortable in speaking with us about this. Sometimes, Chris, as you know, family members are very eager to talk. Here's what we also know. Today at Father Ryan, as at many schools across Davidson County, the state of Tennessee, and this great nation of ours, we're watching CBS News to find out the latest of what happened. As the students were watching, some obviously realizing they had connections both in Washington, D.C. and in New York City. The principal got on the intercom, directed students who had connections in both of those cities that they could come to the chapel here at Father Ryan to pray for their loved ones. 50 students showed up. What I don't know is if the student who had the connection with the stepfather flying for American Airlines, presumably one of the planes that was hijacked after takeoff from Boston that flew into the World Trade Center, was among those. School is out now, right now, Chris, at Father Ryan. Activities in the evening have been canceled. There was a principal's dinner that has been canceled. However, tomorrow at the field house at 10 o'clock, there will be a large school-wide prayer service. The entire school will be packed inside the field house, and we've been told we will be welcome at that service. But again, if you're just tuning in, News Channel 5 has just learned there was a strong Nashville connection to what happened in New York at the World Trade Center on Manhattan Island. That a sophomore here at Father Ryan High School, stepfather, was reportedly the pilot of one of the 2 aircraft that crashed into the World Trade Center this morning. Chris, back to you.
If he was an American airline pilot, then that would be the first plane to hit tower number 1, not the second plane. I believe the second was United Airlines plane that was hijacked. So I stand corrected in directing everybody's attention to that second plane. That would be the first plane. Stand by for more information, more local developments as they occur. So stay with CBS News Channel 5 for all the information. We now return to CBS.
Coordinated attack. Consider the following. The 4 airliners that were used in the attack all took off within about 25 minutes of one another. 2 from Boston, 1 from Newark, 1 from Washington. All in a period of time from about 7:45 this morning to about 8:10 in the morning. Now that's very important because the 3 airports where these airliners left from are among the busiest in the nation. And that, the morning rush hour peak as it's called, is about the busiest time. So if you were going to try to penetrate security on a number of fronts, one might say that that is a perfect time where the system is at its most vulnerable. A couple other points. The 2 airlines involved are the 2 largest airlines in this country, making them obviously 2 symbols of American power, United Airlines and American Airlines. And all 4 planes that were used by the terrorists were filled to capacity with fuel. These were cross-country flights. That was no accident. When these planes are fueled to go from points on the East Coast to the West Coast, they carry tens of thousands of gallons of fuel. What that means is they literally are flying bombs when these planes, heavily laden with fuel, go into a building, they do so with tremendous force. There's tremendous heat, and the explosive power of each of those airplanes is many times greater, I'm told, than the blast we saw that leveled the Oklahoma City Federal Building. Another thing, it seems from looking at the radar track that all of these planes were probably in the air. At least that's what it appears before the first plane started to divert from its flight course. Air traffic controllers watched these planes on radar. They saw the first plane, which was American Airlines Flight 11 from Boston to the West Coast, suddenly turned to the south. It was heading up over Massachusetts and up over eastern New York, and suddenly when it got just over the eastern part of New York, it turned straight south and headed right into Manhattan. Shortly after that, another flight from Boston kind of did a loop around and also headed back towards the city. In addition, sources tell us that there were cockpit conversations between air traffic controllers and whoever might have been in the cockpit. The authorities won't say what was said or what degree the conversations went on, but it was pretty clear to the authorities that there was major trouble here, that hijackings had taken place. We are told, though, that there was not significant time between that realization and the hit of the planes in the World Trade Center really to issue any kind of warning. The most interesting clues, as it might turn out, may come from the plane that really did the least amount of damage. This was a flight that took off from Newark bound for San Francisco. Now, that's a pretty long flight, maybe 5.5 hours or so, and it was a good hour into the flight. It went all the way up normally across Pennsylvania. It got up into northeastern Ohio, and from there, normally it would just continue across the Dakotas and then down across the Rockies into San Francisco. But when it got around Cleveland, this plane did a curious thing as well. It turned around, literally did a U-turn, and controllers watched this on radar, and it circled back around across the northern panhandle of West Virginia until it finally crashed in a rural Pennsylvania field near Somerset. This could turn out to be very, very important because this crash scene is by far, as you might imagine, less chaotic than the horrible rubble we see in New York, less chaotic than the Pentagon crash, and that means the cockpit voice recorder may be easily recovered. If they do get that cockpit voice recorder, immediately authorities will start to listen to that tape, and they may know a great deal about who was in the cockpit, what the motives were, what the methods were, and it may go a long way towards explaining these terrorist attacks. Of course, the questions about security will go on for some time, but for now, an entire nation is trying to deal with an unprecedented attack on this country. Our chief Washington correspondent, Bob Schieffer, has been downtown all day monitoring the reaction in Washington. Bob?
Bob, one of those grim little reminders of just how awful this situation was, excuse me, just a few minutes ago on the White House, they lowered the flag to half-staff. Now, flags had been lowered to half-staff back at the Washington Monument on Beyond earlier today, but the White House has just lowered that to the flag to half-staff. Now, there is some news at 7:30 tonight. We are told that the Republican and Democratic leaders of the Congress will hold a joint press conference on the steps of the Capitol to express their support for the president. We're told that they will also say that the Congress will reassemble in session tomorrow in order to pass a resolution of support for the president, a resolution that will call for tracking down and punishing whoever is responsible for all of this. That's the latest downtown. This town, Bob, from one end of Pennsylvania to another, really in a state of shock tonight.
Thank you, Bob. Across the country, Americans trying to deal with the reality of what may turn out to be the worst attack on American soil. We know about the rubble in New York from the Twin Trade Center towers that have come down. We now know that there are a couple of other buildings in the lower part of Manhattan in the Trade Center complex said to be on fire. There is still a considerable destruction tonight at the Pentagon and all around America. We're trying to make sense of the attack as we look at some of the pictures from New York today. We don't have any firm words yet on the number of victims. Of course, the priority now is to treat those people who may be wounded and injured. And search teams are now looking through rubble on a couple of fronts, trying to find survivors. But we do have a couple of grim facts from the airlines. After all, there were 4 civilian jetliners involved in the attack today. These are planes capable of carrying about 250 passengers apiece. There were 4 planes involved. And we thought initially that the death count just from the airline planes alone could be upwards of 800 or so. It turns out that according to United Airlines and American Airlines, some 266 people, that's passengers, flight attendants, and crew, have been killed in all of these crashes. And as of yet, there is no explanation from the FAA as to how these security breaches took place. A couple of points about security. It's long been a criticized point of the FAA policy that the American aviation system depends too much on luck and good fortune. The magnetometers that you see, the X-ray machines, are put there to catch people walking on planes with guns, and some of the screened bags, some of the checked bags, I should say, are screened. But in large degree, we haven't seen an attack like this in the past, most aviation sources will tell you, because to a certain degree, we have been lucky. Now, we've been telling you through the day that President Bush has not been in Washington, but is heading back to Washington at this hour. Bill Plant has more on that for us now. Bill?
Bob, President Bush started his day in Florida, where he was doing 2 education events. One yesterday, he stayed last night in Sarasota, Florida, and this morning he was reading to a group of school children when he got the word. An aide came up and whispered in his ear what had happened in New York when the first plane hit the first tower of the World Trade Center. He finished reading to the children, and a few minutes later he made a statement, and then got on a plane and said he was heading back to Washington. But as it turned out, the president did not go to Washington. Security concerns were paramount here, and he was taken instead to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. And on the ground in Barksdale, he taped a statement which was later played back for us, and this is what the president had to say at that time to the American people.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning by a faceless coward, and freedom will be defended. I want to reassure the American people that the full resources of the federal government are working to assist local authorities to save lives and to help the victims of these attacks. Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts. I've been in regular contact with the Vice President, Secretary of Defense, the National Security Team, and my cabinet. We have taken all appropriate security precautions to protect the American people. Our military at home and around the world is on high alert status, and we have taken the necessary security precautions to continue the functions of your government. We have been in touch with the leaders of Congress and with world leaders to assure them that we will do whatever is necessary to protect America and Americans. I ask the American people to join me in saying a thanks for all the folks who have been fighting hard to rescue our fellow citizens, and to join me in saying a prayer for the victims and their families. The resolve of our great nation is being tested, but make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test. God bless.
President Bush, that was the videotape that he made outside Shreveport, Louisiana, his second statement of the day. The earlier one, a situation in Florida where he spoke very briefly, had happened about an hour and a half, 2 hours before that statement was made. Russ Mitchell, who's been helping me here at CBS News World Headquarters in New York, has a development and someone to talk to. Russ?
Thank you very much, Dan. And we're here now with Patrick Andre. He works on the 71st floor of building number 2 at the World Trade Center. He's a trading manager at Morgan Stanley. Mr. Andre, thanks for joining us. You were there when the second plane hit. Describe to me what happened.
We were evacuating the 71st floor when suddenly I heard a boom and fire and smoke engulfed the floor, and all the tiles for the ceiling started crumbling down.
The tiles from the ceiling.
Yeah, from the ceiling started. Yeah, and at that point, the two other co-workers who were with me, we decided to go down the stairs, and leave the building.
You went down 71 flights of stairs. Tell me, you said the building didn't shake, but you obviously felt an explosion.
Yes.
What was going through your head when you felt this?
That I'm making sure that everybody who were on my floor were out of the building, evacuated, and a repeat of 1993 since I was there the last time.
That's right. You've worked in that building for 15 years. You were there in 1993 during the terrorist attack then. Let me go back to you going down 71 flights of stairs. How many people were with you? What did you encounter along the way?
There were about 4 people with me at that point, since we were the last one to leave the 71st floor. And in mid-level, we encountered a young lady who was an handicap with crutches and asking for help. And between the 3 of us, we helped her down to the lower floors.
Now, when you got downstairs to the bottom of the building, what did you think? What was the first thing that you did?
That we got some fresh air. And the police and FBI agents were there guiding everyone out of the, to move out of the building. And so it was a relief, really.
Describe the scene, what you saw when you looked outside.
Fire.
Fire.
From building number 1, and debris, a piece of steel falling from that part of the building, the front part, into the lower ground. Yes, the ground was covered with steel, glass, paper from those floors, yes.
You had to be frightened.
Yes, I was.
Yeah. Describe that feeling. I mean, here you are. You're actually there. We're looking at it. We're looking at these pictures here, which are just horrific. This looks like downtown Beirut a few years ago. Rudolph Giuliani said it looks like it was bombed during World War II or something. What's going through your head? You're in the middle of all this.
Well, I guess, like I said, my primary responsibility was the evacuation of my floor. And before anything, I mean, I should not to panic, and keep my head on my shoulder and making sure that everybody was out. And that was the primary responsibility that I had.
The primary responsibility was to get everyone out. Now, what happened? Where were you when the building collapsed? When Tower 2 collapsed?
I was in front of City Hall, between City Hall and GNR Music World.
Which is about, what, 3 blocks away?
About 3 blocks away. And I'm looking up my building, number 2, in flame at the upper level. And then suddenly, I'm looking at the building collapsing like paper.
Yeah.
And, that's really frightening me at that point.
Excuse me, Russ Mitchell. Please forgive me for interrupting, but apparently another building in the World Trade Center complex has just collapsed downtown. This is a live photograph of yet another building. Keep in mind that the World Trade Center complex, check me as I go here, please, sir, has 7 buildings total. Has the 2 towers. They're gone.
Yes.
Now, we reported some time ago that 2 other buildings in the World Trade Center complex were in danger of collapsing. One of those buildings has collapsed. There is an unconfirmed report that is Building 5, but we do not know that. Other sources are apparently reporting this Building 5 in the complex, but we do not know that. What you are looking at, these are live pictures here. We've mixed live and tape, tried to make it clear to you throughout the day what's live, what's videotape. This is live tape, and you can tell it's at least another building collapsed because the density and the amount and frankly, the altitude of the smoke has increased so dramatically in that area. Keep in mind, and we've said this before, we say it again, what you're seeing are high shots. Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself.
Describe that feeling.
Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building.
It's amazing.
Amazing, incredible, pick your word. For the 3rd time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down. And so therefore the smoke that we were talking about, and keep in mind, there are firemen, policemen, other workers down there working, searching for people in the previously collapsed World Trade Center 2 towers, fates unknown. This is an incredible situation. This has never happened before in the United States. This is the most serious attack on U.S. soil that's happened.
This is Chris Clark in Nashville. Let's cut away just briefly from our CBS coverage for an update from Scott Couch. Scott?
Chris, I'm live at Father Ryan High School. To our viewers who've been with us for some time, we have a correction and a clarification to make. A short time ago, we reported that News Channel 5 had learned that a sophomore girl here at Father Ryan High School had a very close connection to the tragedy in New York City related to the World Trade Center and the planes that crashed into it. Officials here at the school had told us that the staff had recently been briefed about the sophomore student being related to one of the pilots on board an American Airlines flight that crashed into the World Trade Center. They were reluctant to release the name of the student to us, obviously for privacy reasons, but we're of the full belief, everyone here, that that story was indeed true and correct. However, after contacting the family to see if they'd be willing to speak to News Channel 5, the family that we are referring to, however, we have not identified that family either, tells the school, who has in turn told us, that there is no connection between the school and what happened at the World Trade Center in New York, Chris, and we wanted to get on the air and clarify and make that correction as soon as possible.
Scott Couch, thanks for that clarification. Now, stay tuned to News Channel 5 and CBS. We'll bring you local developments as they occur. Let's return now to CBS.
Panes of glass crashing down into the street, and at that moment, the firefighters told us that there was a good chance that building number 7 was going to collapse. That appears to be what has happened now. I don't know exactly how many stories the building is, Dan, but standing at the base of it, watching it burn about an hour ago, it looked to be something on the order of 50, 60 stories, as you said, a very, very large office building. And I don't know whether they were able to evacuate all of the emergency personnel before the collapse, but I can tell you that an hour ago, there were a number of firefighters and police officers in the area. They were watching building number 7 burn because there was frankly nothing they could do about it. The inferno was huge. So much of the building was collapsing into the street bit by bit that they were unable to do anything with it. And now it seems that building number 7 has finally collapsed, at least the 3rd building to fall in the World Trade Center today.
Scott Pelley in Lower Manhattan. I don't believe Scott Pelley hears me, but Scott, on the off chance you do we know anything about Trade Center Building 5, which was reported near collapse?
Dan, I don't know, but when we were down about a block from the base of the World Trade Center towers about an hour ago. And there was a great deal of concern at that time from the firemen that building number 7 was going to collapse, building number 5 was in danger of collapsing, and there is so little they can do to try to fight the fires in these buildings because the fires are so massive. And so much of the buildings continue to fall into the street. When you're down there, Dan, you hear smaller secondary explosions going off every 15 or 20 minutes. And so it is an extremely dangerous place to be. Heavy, dense black smoke choking the firefighters down there. Very little they can do to save these buildings. We don't know what the condition of building number 5 is at this moment.
Scott Pelley, and we're told Associated Press quotes authorities as saying that building 7, the one you just saw collapse on videotape there, and this has happened within the last few minutes, that we're told that the building had been evacuated. Sir, you know the World Trade Center complex. What was building 7? Do you know?
It was the Solomon Smith Barney.
Solomon Smith Barney. Say again.
It was built for Solomon Smith Barney.
So Solomon Brothers and Smith Barney were in that building, headquartered there. Yes. But I want to emphasize that we're told that the building had been evacuated because it was in danger of collapsing in some time.
I don't know.
And in building 5, which is reported on...
This is Morgan Stanley building as well.
And you work in Morgan Stanley again.
Building 5 is the operation for Morgan
Thank you very much. And we get back to the point which has been made earlier in the day, we repeated here, that the terrorists, whomever they may be, yes, there's a lot of talk about Osama bin Laden and others, but whomever this together, did so, a coordinated attack, attacking the 2 symbols of America's superpower status, the financial district the Twin Towers now and hearing about these other buildings, part of the World Trade Center complex around the towers being centers of American financial institutions, and then, of course, another of the hijacked planes hitting the Pentagon. Not by coincidence, they chose these targets for their symbolism. Now, we're coming up to the top of the hour here in our continuing CBS News coverage from our world headquarters in New York. We do have coming in additional video that you haven't seen before, taken by private individuals, and we're going to show you some of that as we pass the top of this next hour. We also, as we've been doing all day, at the top of the hour and then at the half-hour mark, try to bring you up to date on the situation, the latest information, and put a frame around this incredible day, a day that will leave an infamy in United States history. There are no reliable even estimates of the total number of dead and wounded in New York at this time, and it may be quite some time before we have that information. Another building in the World Trade Complex has collapsed. You are watching continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America. Dan Rather at CBS News World Headquarters in New York as our continuous coverage of this day goes on. Now, we have new videotape of the attack on the World Trade Center. Let me caution you that we're giving this to you more or less raw. This is strong material, and some of the language you will hear. We want you to hear the sight and the sound of what happened this morning. But unfortunately, on this particular piece of tape, and one of the pieces of tape you're about to see, some of the language is strong. So if we can roll that videotape now or as soon as possible. One of the Trade Center buildings has been hit at a high floor, maybe above floor 90, by one aircraft. That would be American Flight 11. Now look at the plane coming in the middle. Oh, what a picture.
Don't touch it. Oh my God!
That plane hit the second building at a much lower level. First plane hit very high up on the one tower, maybe floor 90 or above. Second plane at what? I don't know, maybe floor 71 and up.
Yes.
You may want to run that videotape again. This we just got into our newsroom, this videotape. And not long after this, first one and then the other of these towers collapsed, and now we've had Building 7 of the World Trade Center, where Salomon Brothers Smith Barney had their headquarters. We're going to re-rack that videotape and show it to you again. As we do the re-racking, say that we don't have any confirmed figures on the number of people killed at the Pentagon or the number of people wounded there in Washington where a hijacked plane hit. We have no idea of the New York fatalities. Here again is this photograph. The building on the left is about to be hit by the hijacked incoming plane.
Holy fuck! Oh my God! Oh my God! Jesus fucking Christ! Don't touch it. Oh my God!
A ball of flame envelops the second of the World Trade Center towers.
Oh my God!
Untold death and destruction. As after being hit by the second plane, the second tower eventually collapsed after both of these twin towers collapsed. Now Building 7 in the World Trade Center, after being evacuated, we're told, collapsed. In the debris below, people still trapped. This is new videotape that had not been seen before. Dateline Washington, the Pentagon now says, and we've checked and double-checked this, 100 people believed killed or injured. There's no differentiation. We still don't know how many killed, how many injured at the Pentagon, but the Defense Department says its best available information is 100 people believed killed or injured at the Pentagon. And while the Pentagon symbolically was one of the two targets today, that the death, the wounding, and the damage at the Pentagon, nothing to compare with what's happened with the World Trade Center complex. Paramedics waiting to be sent into the rubble today were told that once the smoke clears, it's going to be massive bodies, quote unquote. That's Brian Stark, an ex-Navy paramedic who volunteered to help. Stark said paramedics were told that, quote, hundreds of police and firefighters are missing from the ranks of those sent in to respond to the initial crash. Now, mind you, this is only one person speaking. New York police and firemen rushed to the scene this morning, as is their destiny when they volunteer for such work. They place themselves in harm's way. And it has been thought throughout the day that certainly some police and firemen would turn up missing, and according to this paramedic, he says he was told, quote, that hundreds of police and firefighters are missing. Let me caution you, we do not know that for a fact. And as we've said repeatedly, and I say again now without apology, sometimes the first information you get from the scene turns out to be wrong information. We do our best to nail down the facts. We'd rather be last with information than be wrong. We try to give information to you as quickly as we can get it. In this kind of situation, I know you will understand when I say there's no way that we can do it perfectly. We do our very best. And our number one job, the number one job here is accuracy. Now, among the other facts that we know is that the president is on his way to Washington. I have to say I don't really know that to be a fact. That's been officially announced that he's on his way to Washington. The president will be addressing the nation tonight from Washington, we're told. Will he be speaking to the White House? We do not know that. Now, we're in effect handling all kinds of hot information and material here. We have, I'm told, more videotape that's never been seen before today. That you saw a minute ago about that second plane hitting the World Trade Center, not been seen before. We have additional videotape now of what happened here in New York earlier this morning. Watch this. This is, I haven't seen this before. I'm seeing it for the first time as you do. The first building hit at high floor by the first plane is in smoke. The second building has just been hit with a plane.
The whole building's gone.
I beg your pardon. It was the collapse of the first tower. Now let's go back over this videotape we've not seen before. The tower that was hit by the first plane is still standing. It won't be for long. Remember, this all happened this morning between 9 and 11 a.m. In the second building, now you saw, we'll show these videotapes to you in sequence. First, you have the videotape of the plane coming, and it was coming at pretty high speed, much greater speed than the first plane that hit. We have videotape showing the building hit, and then this second videotape taken from some distance of the first of the towers to collapse. Perhaps we can re-rack that videotape at some point. Strange, eerie. I used the word, if it is a word, Dantesque earlier in the day. How instead of a ball of flame going up and great billows of smoke going upward, they came downward into and toward the earth itself. But that's because the building collapsed. Now, this is the collapse, the first of the towers to collapse. We just secured this video.
The whole building's gone.
The whole building's gone. Indeed.
Holy fucking Jesus!
We do apologize for the language on the videotape. One can understand people seeing this incredible sight. And when you see this, you're reminded why everyone in authority is saying we should be prepared for eventually finding out many dead, many seriously wounded, and at this hour, as night has not yet fallen, but begins to creep in on New York City, there are people trapped in the rubble. And when the third building collapsed, World Trade Center building number 7, people who are making efforts to save those people in the rubble who are trapped in there, some of those people were in peril as that Trade Center building number 7 collapsed within the last hour, hour and a half. Now what you're going to see next is videotape of the second World Trade Center building collapsing. from a different view than you've seen it before. This is, again, new videotape. One of the World Trade Center buildings has already collapsed. The second, the actual first one to hit by the plane, is still standing. But there's a smoking ruin on its upper floors. These World Trade Center towers have absorbed a tremendous shock of fast-flying airliners, highly inflammable aviation fuel. The one building has collapsed.
Oh no! Oh no!
And once it starts to go, how quickly it went. These home videos, taken from across the way, from a place that once had a spectacular view of a spectacular New York skyline. And the smoke told the story. Scott Pelley will bring us up to date on the situation in Lower Manhattan. Scott, it's an unsettling moment to see, again, different views of those buildings collapsing and indeed the aircraft hitting the second building. But what's the situation down there right now?
Dan, the smoke that you see rising behind me now is from World Trade Center building number 7, which collapsed about 15 minutes ago. This is a very large building. It's 47 stories tall, at least half a block wide. This would have been a catastrophe in its own right, Dan. The building has been on fire all day since the initial attack. About an hour ago, I was down there with a CBS News camera crew, and we were talking to firefighters and police officers. Building number 7 was completely involved in flame. Flames were shooting out of the building. Large panes of glass were falling into the street. The firefighters explained that there was nothing they could do to try to put the fire out because it was just simply far too dangerous, and they warned us an hour ago that the building might collapse, and indeed that is what has come to pass. Apparently, some of the city's emergency operations were located in that building. The fire department is telling us now that they have lost some of their communications at this point. The building, of course, being on fire, being at the scene of the attack, had been evacuated much, much earlier. There was no one in the building at the time that it collapsed about 15 minutes ago. However, I will tell you that when we left there an hour ago, there were several New York City police officers and firefighters down there making sure that no one else came into the area. Dan?
Scott Pelley on the scene reporting live from Lower Manhattan. Now we're going to show you again videotape of World Trade Center Building 7. This is the one that just collapsed within the last hour and a half, 2 hours at the outside. This was a 47-story tall building. This is a scene on the ground just after this building came tumbling down. And yet new bellows of the horrible smoke and the stench from the smoke began to fill Lower Manhattan all anew.
Flash off, please. Right, flash off.
We're going to re-rack this videotape for you because what we intend to show you, and we have on videotape, is the collapse of that World Trade Center building number 7, which housed Solomon Brothers and Smith Barney. I look away because our friend here, who's an eyewitness and who worked in the building. And by the way, let's get a picture. Another, he wouldn't call himself a hero. Here's a man in our studio who's given us some eyewitness reports here today, who calmly got together, led people out of the building. It was his responsibility. He took it upon himself to get people out and then get himself out. Was there actual panic as you did then?
There were panic among the staff, yes. But the important thing, everybody got out on time before.
Well, you won't say it, but I will. You got everybody out.
Yeah.
David Martin is outside the Pentagon. David.
Dan, the U.S. is trying to do two very different things here simultaneously. One is to hunker down and button up and protect against the possibility of still another attack, and that's why the Pentagon has put all of its bases on the highest state of alert, and the State Department has put all American embassies around the world on the highest state of alert. But at the same time, the U.S. wants to create an impression, at least, of a quick return to normalcy, and that is one of the reasons why the president is coming back to Washington tonight. You know, he spent the day moving about from military base to military base as much as he would in the event of a nuclear war. That now is ended, and they are bringing the president back to Washington to try and create this impression of a return to normalcy. But obviously, as you can see behind me, we are a long, long way from normal. One of the obvious questions here is who did this? And the early suspicions are focused on Osama bin Laden, the terrorist who seems to have made it his life's calling to attack Americans around the world. And in this case, I think, in contrast to previous cases, there is very little doubt that there will be some form of military retaliation. What form it will take and when it might happen, I think it's much too early to tell, but I think it is all but inevitable.
David Martin, two questions. The last quote we had from any official at the Pentagon was that 100 people were believed killed or injured. Any later information about that?
The only number I've heard, Dan, which is 20 dead, but no one expected it to end there. The services that had offices in that part of the building have asked all of the people assigned there to call in so they know who made it out. And there are still, among all the services, hundreds of unaccounted for, but you don't know if that's because they didn't make it out or simply because they haven't called in. But if you just take a fully loaded commercial airliner, you know that the death toll is going to go much higher than 20, no matter who was caught in the building.
Well, that's a good point. And the belief is that American Flight 77, headed from Dulles Airport near Washington to Los Angeles, a Boeing 757. This is the plane that's believed to have crashed into the Pentagon, had 58 passengers and 6 crew. And while one might hope and pray that somebody among those 58 passengers, 6 crew survived, it seems highly unlikely. So right there, you would have, in the 60s, the number of people dead, killed at the Pentagon. And the wife of U.S. Solicitor General Theodore Olson was aboard the jetliner that crashed into the Pentagon. She called him as the plane was being hijacked. She twice called her husband and described some details of the hijacking, including, now this is Barbara Olson, an attorney, very intelligent woman, the wife of the U.S. Solicitor General, the new one, Theodore Olson. She said that the attackers were using knife-like instruments. When she called her husband, she said the attackers, this is on the plane, that would have been the American Airlines Flight 77. She said that the attackers were using knife-like instruments. Now, the officials who quoted this conversation to the woman's husband declined to give any further details of the conversation. In a brief telephone interview from his home, Theodore Olson said his wife was on the plane and that crashed into the Pentagon, and he said, I wish it wasn't so, but it is. Olson argues President Bush's case is before the Supreme Court. We're going to go back to David Martin at the Pentagon. David, I understand you have some additional information or insight, and then I have an additional question for you, please.
You were talking about the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. Someone made the point to me that all of these planes were cross-country flights that had just taken off, meaning they were all carrying full loads of fuel, which would obviously increase the destruction that they caused when they crashed into a building. Whether that was part of the plan or whether it just worked out that way, we of course don't know, but it would certainly indicate, at least initially, that considerable thought and planning went into this attack.
Indeed, David, including that they hit the World Trade Center at the height of morning rush hour, right at 9 o'clock. First one building, then the other, right at the very height of rush hour here in New York City. David, stand by because I have some questions about possible U.S. responses. You say, you know, the U.S. will respond. The how and why of that I'd like to discuss with you. But first, we want to go through a sequence of pictures of what happened here in New York today at the World Trade Center, including two pieces of videotape that CBS News obtained exclusively and we've shown only in the last half hour or so. So this sequence of events that will not necessarily be in order, but this to review for you and give you the latest picture information we have is the way it was this morning between 9 and 11 a.m. New York time, Eastern time. One plane has hit the upper tier, but watch the left-hand corner of your screen. The second World Trade Tower has not yet been hit. It's about 9 a.m. Here comes the plane, very high speed, cuts almost through the building. Great balls of fire, tremendous bellows of smoke. The voices you hear in the background, the people in the home or the place where these pictures were taken. So the second building was hit. Now, you note the plane went in at about, that aircraft hit that tower at floor about 71. The first building was hit, 90 or above, say. So both buildings are now smoke and flame. Now, different view. Both buildings are aflame. Fire, and then the building that was hit second comes tumbling down. That was the one where the airplane came in particularly quickly and hit the building at about floor 71. The Chrysler building in the background. Now the second tower, which was actually hit first by American Flight 11, begins to crumble. Disappear. And since then, the most recent collapse, which happened just a short while ago, Building 7, a 47-story building as part of the World Trade Center complex, collapsed. That building had been, we were told, completely evacuated. But the fate of people on the ground, including rescue workers, as it came tumbling down, we simply don't know. But it had been threatening to collapse, had been on the verge of collapse for a long while, so perhaps most of the area had been evacuated, but who could have anticipated this kind of incredibly dense and fast-moving smoke, which covers many blocks in New York. And like some white monster, came quickly down side streets and major thoroughfares. Now stay with me here, stay with us here. CBS, this is another, see the plane? This is another view, more videotape.
Into the South Tower.
This plane.
Against a backdrop of gentle blue sky, a terrorist arrow pierces the heart of a city and a nation.
Oh. Those two sequences we should see again.
One more horrifying than the next.
And we will show you.
This was a United Airlines flight 175.
Some of this video has just now become available. And in the aftermath, well, if you've been with us, you know what happens. We're going to try to re-rack. That's the opposite side of the second tower hit. You know, we had different views during the day, but this was photographed from that side of the building. Now we're going to recue that sequence of videotape. This includes new videotape material obtained by CBS News over the last hour and a half. We have shown some of it. Now, this is the latest new video we have. You see the plane coming in high speed, aiming for the mid-level, and hits it.
Pierces the heart of a city and a nation.
That was the second flight, United Flight 175, and this is a reverse side of the building. See, the plane actually pierced the building.
There were several angles.
Virtually came out the other side. Yet another view, the plane hitting.
It's almost like the building swallowed the plane.
Yeah.
Yes. And here you see this aircraft below. Did you see that?
Mm-hmm.
You had to be looking closely on the right-hand side to see it hitting there. And indeed, Russ Mitchell said it's almost as if the building swallowed the plane and then belched back up. Well, nobody's ever seen photographs like that because nothing like this has ever happened before. We go to David Martin at the Pentagon.
Dan, we were talking earlier about trying to give the appearance of a return to normalcy. Well, now we have one other appearance of normalcy, which is the fact that Defense Secretary Rumsfeld will give a briefing later this evening in the briefing room in the Pentagon. In other words, we're going to be allowed to go back into the Pentagon, and obviously, as that is designed in part to give a show that you can damage the Pentagon, but you can't sink it, that business continues in there as normal. Now, obviously, one of the pieces of business that's going to be continuing now is planning for some sort of military retaliation, although I think it's much too early for us to really have any good idea what that might look like.
David Martin, we're going to go to Bob Orr, who has some new information in just a moment, but once in the Far East, an intelligence operative who was talking about revenge for things, terrorist events, used the quote, he said it was an old Oriental expression, revenge is best served cold, which the thought was that you don't want to enrage, lash out immediately. Now, given the fact, and it is a fact, that after the 1998 attacks on the U.S. embassies in East Africa, the United States government responded in fairly quickly with 2 separate cruise missile attacks, many missiles, at Sudan and Afghanistan. My question to you, David Martin, when you talk about some kind of retaliation is certain, what has been the thinking before this happened about the advisability of responding immediately or waiting and, in effect, serving revenge cold?
Well, they have 2 lines. One is that we will strike in a time and place of our choosing, and that supports the argument that you don't have to do something right away. But after those cruise missile attacks on the Sudan and Afghanistan, the argument was that that was not retaliation, that was preemption, because Osama bin Laden was planning further attacks against the U.S. and they had to disrupt his operations. So I can see that that argument would apply here as well. The U.S. could say it has intelligence that this was not all the attacks that were planned, that Osama bin Laden had further attacks planned and they had to act quickly to upset these plans. On the other hand, I can see them wanting to take their time and get it right so that we don't have another largely ineffectual strike as we did following the embassy bombings. The strikes did not get Osama bin Laden and obviously did not have any lasting impact on his operations, since he has been behind most of the threats that the U.S. has had to react to over the years. And of course, if the evidence indicates that he was behind this as well, then of course we really didn't do much to stop him with that earlier strike. And I think all that would argue for some very large military response, perhaps including going after him on the ground, which of course is always risky because of casualties. But I think the proportion of the offense, I mean, let's face it, this was the worst sneak attack on America since Pearl Harbor. And when you put it in that context, I think the American public would support taking casualties to go after the person who was behind that. But all that's still pretty far down the road, Dan.
Indeed, David Martin speaking live from the Pentagon. President Bush will address the nation tonight. CBS News will cover it live. We'll be staying on the air live. Very quickly, Russ Mitchell has some new information about attending to the wounded in New York.
That's right, Dan. The Health and Human Services Department has activated a national medical emergency system. This is an unprecedented move that will dispatch about 7,000 volunteer doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and other medical staff to areas affected by Tuesday's attacks, which of course would be New York and Washington. The timetable for this, Dan, I'm told, is immediately.
Russ Mitchell, 7,000 volunteer doctors sought from around the nation to come help in New York with what is a massive healing and tending to the dead and wounded operation, which will go on for weeks, if indeed not months. Now, Bob Orr in Washington has a new insight on this information from Barbara Olson, who was aboard one of the planes hijacked, about knife-wielding or knife-type instruments in the aircraft, and Orr's going to put that in perspective for you just at the top of the hour. Now, at the top of every hour and at the half-hour mark, we try to bring you up to date on the latest video we have, the latest pictures we have, the latest information that we have, and we'll be doing that just past the top of the hour on many of these CBS stations. The aircraft involved this morning, American Airlines Flight 11, Boston to Los Angeles. That was the first of two planes to hit a World Trade Center building. The second was United Flight 175, Boston to Los Angeles. That was the second plane to hit a World Trade Center building. American Flight 77, Dulles, near Washington to Los Angeles. This is the plane that hit near the Pentagon. Then United Flight 93, Newark, New Jersey to San Francisco, is the plane that apparently went down in Somerset County in western Pennsylvania. They believe they might get the cockpit recorder from that, and if they do, it could be valuable information. You're watching continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America. Dan Rather with Russ Mitchell and the worldwide resources of CBS News with our continuing coverage of this historic day of infamy in the United States of America. An audacious and devastatingly effective sneak attack on the United States today. Terrorists crashed two hijacked airliners into the World Trade Center towers, and they destroyed both of those towers. And as a consequence of that, then later this afternoon, World Trade Center building